The quickest way to dishonor a hero is to assume you already know his story. The first rays of Saturday morning sunlight stretched across the football field as families poured into the packed high school stadium. Dressed in their finest clothes and carrying bouquets of flowers, cameras, and handmade signs celebrating the graduates who were about to begin a new chapter of life. Laughter drifted through the warm spring air, children chased one another along the walkways, and proud grandparents searched for seats that would give them the perfect view of the stage. Among the hundreds of parents quietly making their way toward the family section walked Master Sergeant Daniel Brooks, a 46-year-old Black Marine who had spent more than 2 decades serving the United States Marine Corps before retiring with quiet honor. His Marine dress blues were perfectly pressed, every ribbon carefully aligned, every brass button polished until it reflected the bright morning light. He had prepared the uniform the night before with the same care he once gave every inspection before reporting for duty. This was not about impressing strangers. It was about showing his son that some moments deserved respect, tradition, and gratitude. Folded carefully inside the breast pocket of his uniform rested the invitation his son had personally handed him several weeks earlier. Across the front, written in bold letters, were the words, "Reserved Family Seating." Daniel had smiled the first time he read them because he knew how much that small gesture meant. His son had earned excellent grades while balancing school, athletics, and volunteer work, often saying that his father had taught him the meaning of discipline without ever raising his voice. Today belonged to the graduate, not the Marine. Daniel quietly reminded himself of that as he climbed the concrete steps toward the reserved section. He greeted an elderly usher with a warm smile, thanked a volunteer handing out graduation programs, and politely stepped aside whenever another family needed extra room to pass. Several people noticed the distinguished Marine uniform and nodded respectfully. Daniel returned every greeting with the same calm humility that had defined his entire military career. When he reached the reserved seating area, he presented his invitation to a volunteer who checked the seating chart, smiled, and directed him toward an excellent seat near the front where families of graduates had already begun gathering. Daniel thanked her, placed his program neatly on the seat, and looked toward the stage where rows of empty chairs waited for the graduating class. His eyes lingered on one chair in particular, imagining the moment his son would proudly walk across the stage to receive his diploma. The simple thought filled him with more pride than any medal he had ever received. He quietly folded his hands together and allowed himself to enjoy the peaceful atmosphere surrounding him. The school band tuned their instruments. Faculty members arranged name cards across the stage. A gentle breeze carried the sound of fluttering American flags positioned beside the podium. For a few precious minutes, everything felt exactly as it should. Then a firm voice interrupted the calm. "Sir, I need you to stand up for a moment." Daniel looked up immediately and saw Officer Ryan Walker approaching with measured steps, his neatly pressed police uniform reflecting the morning sun. Daniel rose without hesitation, offering a courteous smile. "Good morning, officer. How can I help you?" Walker studied the Marine dress blues before shifting his attention toward the reserved seating section. His expression remained professional, but unusually guarded. "I need to verify why you are sitting in this area." Daniel calmly reached inside his uniform jacket and removed the official graduation invitation. "My son is graduating today," he said gently. "The school assigned this seat to our family." Walker accepted the invitation but did not immediately examine it. Instead, he glanced once more at Daniel, then slowly surveyed the nearby families as several conversations faded into curious silence. Parents turned discreetly in their seats. Camera phones lowered. Even the school band seemed quieter for a brief moment as anticipation settled across the section. Daniel remained standing with quiet dignity, his hands relaxed at his sides, his expression unchanged. He had faced difficult moments before, but never had he imagined that the greatest test of patience might come while waiting to watch his own son receive a high school diploma. Officer Ryan Walker accepted the graduation invitation from Master Sergeant Daniel Brooks, but continued holding it without opening the folded card. Instead, he studied the retired Marine standing before him with an expression that suggested he had already reached a conclusion long before examining the evidence. Daniel remained perfectly still, his polished Marine dress blues catching the warm morning sunlight, as a gentle breeze stirred the American flags surrounding the stadium. Around them, conversations faded into whispers while parents quietly watched from nearby rows, unsure why the distinguished veteran had suddenly become the center of attention. Daniel understood that uncomfortable moments often attracted curious eyes, but decades in the Marine Corps had taught him that composure always spoke louder than frustration. He kept his hands relaxed at his sides and waited respectfully for the officer to continue. Walker finally glanced down at the invitation, scanning only the front before looking back toward Daniel. "How did you get this seat?" he asked in a measured voice. Daniel answered with quiet confidence. "My son invited me. The school assigned our family here several weeks ago." Walker nodded slightly, but did not appear convinced. "Please remain standing while I verify a few things." "Of course, officer," Daniel replied without hesitation. As Walker stepped several feet away to speak with another member of the security team, Daniel quietly looked toward the graduation stage once more. Faculty members continued arranging programs, while student volunteers escorted elderly relatives toward accessible seating. The school band rehearsed a few soft notes before falling silent again. Everything around him reflected celebration, yet the peaceful atmosphere now carried an undercurrent of uncertainty that seemed impossible to ignore. Daniel lowered his eyes briefly toward the graduation program resting on his seat. Printed across the cover was the name of his son, one among hundreds of graduates whose families had gathered to celebrate years of hard work. For Daniel, however, the journey had begun long before high school. He remembered helping with homework after returning from demanding assignments, attending every parent-teacher conference whenever duty allowed, and teaching his son that character mattered most when no one was watching. The sacrifices made throughout his military career had never been about medals or recognition. They had always been about creating opportunities for the next generation. Watching his son receive a diploma meant more to him than every formal ceremony he had attended while wearing the uniform. Several rows behind him, an elderly couple quietly admired the Marine dress blues. The older gentleman leaned toward his wife and whispered, "That man carries himself like someone who has served for many years." She nodded gently before looking toward the officer, now speaking into a handheld radio near the entrance to the reserved seating section. Walker had begun asking questions through the event security channel while occasionally glancing back toward Daniel. Recent safety briefings before the ceremony had emphasized the importance of preventing unauthorized access to reserved family areas because attendance had exceeded expectations. Walker believed careful vigilance protected everyone present. Yet confidence in his own instincts had slowly become stronger than his habit of verifying every detail first. Daniel noticed the officer speaking on the radio, but made no effort to interrupt. He trusted official procedures because his entire military career had depended upon them. If there had been any misunderstanding, he believed facts would resolve it. A school volunteer carrying bottled water approached quietly. "Sir, would you like some water while you wait?" she asked kindly. Daniel smiled warmly. "Thank you very much." He accepted the bottle, took a small sip, and returned it to the cup holder beside his seat without sitting down. Even in uncertainty, courtesy remained natural to him. Walker returned moments later with another school security staff member. Both men looked toward Daniel before quietly comparing the seating chart against the invitation still resting in Walker's hand. Nearby parents exchanged uncertain glances. Camera phones slowly lowered. The principal had not yet appeared on stage, and the graduation ceremony had not officially begun, but an unusual stillness settled across the front rows, as though the entire stadium sensed that something important was unfolding. Daniel remained exactly where he had been asked to stand, his expression calm, his posture steady, and his attention fixed not upon the growing crowd around him, but upon the single empty chair waiting for his son on the graduation stage, believing with quiet certainty that truth always required less effort than defending assumptions. Officer Ryan Walker compared the graduation invitation against the seating chart for a second time before handing both documents to the school security coordinator standing beside him. The coordinator studied the papers carefully, tracing one finger across the printed list of reserved family seats, while occasionally looking toward Master Sergeant Daniel Brooks. After several quiet moments, he shrugged slightly. "Everything appears to match," he said. Walker accepted the documents again, but remained unconvinced. Something about Daniel's presence continued challenging the assumptions he had formed within the first few seconds of their encounter. Recent security briefings before graduation season had emphasized that counterfeit invitations occasionally appeared at large public ceremonies, especially when reserved seating was limited. Walker had built a reputation for noticing details other officers sometimes overlooked, and years of successful event security had strengthened his confidence in trusting instinct. Unfortunately, that confidence had also made him slower to question his own first impressions. Daniel stood patiently beneath the warm spring sunlight, without showing the slightest irritation. His polished marine dress blues reflected the bright morning sky, while the colorful graduation banners fluttered gently behind the stage. Around him, parents whispered quietly as they tried to understand why the distinguished veteran remained standing instead of taking his assigned seat. Several graduates waiting behind the stage curtains noticed the growing attention directed toward the front rows, though they could not hear the conversation unfolding. Daniel briefly glanced toward the entrance where students would soon begin marching onto the football field. Somewhere behind those doors, his son was preparing to walk across the stage after years of determination, sacrifice, and perseverance. Daniel had promised himself that nothing would distract from that milestone, regardless of whatever misunderstanding might arise before the ceremony began. Walker stepped closer once again. "Sir, I appreciate your cooperation, but I still need additional verification before allowing you to remain in this section." Daniel nodded respectfully. "I understand your responsibility, officer." He reached into the inside pocket of his Marine jacket and carefully removed a government-issued identification card along with the official graduation invitation. "If these help clarify anything, you are welcome to review them." Walker accepted the identification card and examined it carefully. It confirmed Daniel's identity exactly as he had described. The photograph matched perfectly. Every security feature appeared genuine. Even so, Walker's uncertainty remained. Rather than contacting school administrators immediately for final confirmation, he continued asking questions himself. "How many graduates do you know here today?" he asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "Only one matters to me. Your son." Walker asked. "Yes," Daniel answered warmly. "He has worked very hard to earn this day." Those simple words carried unmistakable sincerity, yet Walker remained hesitant. Nearby, the principal stepped onto the stage to speak briefly with faculty members making final preparations. Volunteers distributed bottled water to elderly guests while photographers positioned cameras near the front of the field. The school band quietly rehearsed the opening notes of the national anthem before falling silent again. Every indication suggested the ceremony would begin within minutes, but the unusual pause surrounding Daniel continued, drawing curious glances from families seated nearby. An elderly woman carrying a bouquet of white roses leaned toward another parent and whispered, "That Marine has been nothing but respectful since this started." The other parent nodded quietly. "He has not argued once." Daniel overheard neither comment. His attention remained focused on maintaining the calm dignity that had guided him through countless difficult situations during his military career. He understood that raising his voice would only make the moment more painful for everyone, especially his son. Walker looked once more at the identification card before speaking into his shoulder radio. "I need a supervisor to the reserved family section for an additional verification." The message echoed softly through the communication system worn by event security personnel. Several heads turned toward the front rows. The atmosphere across the stadium gradually shifted from ordinary curiosity to quiet anticipation. Daniel folded his hands gently in front of him and waited without complaint. High above the football field, the American flag moved slowly against a cloudless blue sky, while sunlight illuminated the empty chair that still waited for his son on the graduation stage. Unknown to everyone gathered there, 6 men seated separately throughout the stadium had quietly observed every moment of the conversation, and each of them had just begun paying much closer attention than anyone around them realized. Officer Ryan Walker lowered his radio after requesting a supervisor and looked once again toward Master Sergeant Daniel Brooks, whose calm expression had not changed despite the growing attention surrounding him. The reserved family section had become unusually quiet. Parents who had arrived expecting nothing more than a joyful graduation ceremony now watched the exchange with respectful curiosity. Children stopped swinging their legs beneath folding chairs. Camera straps rested against shoulders instead of lifting toward the stage. Even the faculty members arranging diplomas occasionally glanced toward the front rows before returning to their responsibilities. Daniel remained standing exactly where he had first been asked, his marine dress blues perfectly pressed beneath the bright spring sun, his invitation and identification resting patiently in Officer Walker's hands. He could have protested. He could have demanded immediate answers. Instead, years of military discipline reminded him that dignity often required silence before resolution. Walker stepped closer once again. "Sir, until my supervisor arrives, I am asking that you remain away from the reserved seat." Daniel nodded politely. "I understand." He stepped only a few feet to the side so another family could continue taking their seats without interruption. His movement reflected cooperation rather than surrender. He wanted nothing to distract from the graduates waiting behind the stadium entrance, especially not the son who had invited him to witness one of the most important mornings of his life. Across the football field, the school band quietly began warming up once more. Brass instruments reflected sunlight, while the percussion section adjusted music stands in preparation for the opening processional. The familiar sounds of graduation slowly returned, yet the emotional tension near the reserved seating area continued growing. Walker reviewed Daniel's invitation again before comparing it with the seating list one more time. Every printed detail appeared legitimate. The name matched. The assigned section matched. The family designation matched. Even so, something continued preventing Walker from accepting what the documents clearly showed. He quietly told himself that careful officers asked one extra question rather than overlooking one important detail. Unfortunately, his confidence in that belief had begun replacing the simple act of trusting verified evidence already in front of him. A school administrator hurried toward the front rows after receiving the supervisor request over the event communication system. Before she reached them, another volunteer whispered that the graduation procession would begin in only a few minutes. Time was quietly running out. Daniel looked briefly toward the stadium entrance where graduates would soon appear wearing blue caps and gowns. Somewhere inside that building, his son was likely adjusting his graduation cap, laughing with classmates, and searching the stands in anticipation of finding his father's familiar Marine uniform among the crowd. Daniel silently hoped his son would remain unaware of the situation unfolding only a short distance away. No young graduate deserved unnecessary worry on a day meant for celebration. Walker folded the invitation carefully and returned it to Daniel, but continued holding the military identification. "I still need additional confirmation," he said. Daniel answered with the same measured tone that had guided every conversation that morning. "Take whatever time is necessary, officer." Several parents exchanged quiet glances after hearing the response. One middle-aged father softly remarked, "He has been respectful from the beginning." Another parent nodded without speaking. Their attention quickly shifted when movement appeared in different sections of the stadium. Scattered among the audience, 6 men who had arrived separately slowly stood from their seats almost at the same moment. None wore military uniforms. Each was dressed in ordinary civilian clothing suitable for a graduation ceremony. Yet the quiet confidence with which they moved immediately distinguished them from the surrounding crowd. Without exchanging words, they began walking calmly toward the reserved family section from different directions, their expressions focused, their pace unhurried, and their attention fixed entirely on Daniel Brooks. Walker noticed the unexpected movement and instinctively turned toward the approaching men. Parents nearby followed his gaze, unsure whether the newcomers knew the retired Marine personally or had simply become concerned after watching the prolonged misunderstanding. Daniel recognized none of the 6 faces immediately, yet something about the way they carried themselves felt deeply familiar. Their posture, discipline, and quiet confidence reflected years of professional service that needed no introduction. As the first notes of the graduation processional echoed softly across the stadium, the 6 men quietly closed the remaining distance, and every person standing near the reserved family section sensed that the next few moments would change the entire morning. The first of the 6 men reached the reserved family section just as the opening notes of the graduation processional echoed across the stadium. He wore a dark navy sport coat, a crisp white shirt, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone long accustomed to responsibility. Without raising his voice, he stopped beside Master Sergeant Daniel Brooks and looked respectfully toward him before turning his attention to Officer Ryan Walker. Within seconds, the remaining 5 men arrived from different sections of the stands. None of them appeared hurried. None displayed anger. They simply stood together with calm discipline, forming a quiet line beside Daniel as hundreds of curious eyes followed every movement. Parents who had never met any of them immediately sensed something unusual. Their posture was unmistakable. Their composure reflected years of professional training that no civilian clothing could conceal. Walker studied the group carefully. "Gentlemen, may I ask why you have approached this area?" The man who had arrived first answered politely. "Because the gentleman standing beside you deserves the same respect he has shown everyone here this morning." His voice remained calm, measured, and completely professional. Walker maintained his composure. "Do you know him personally?" The man smiled slightly. "Yes, officer." "Very well." One after another, the remaining 5 men quietly introduced themselves by first name only. Each explained that they had served in highly specialized military assignments and had worked alongside Daniel Brooks during joint operations that demanded exceptional trust between different branches of the United States Armed Forces. None attempted to exaggerate Daniel's accomplishments. None revealed confidential details. Instead, each described the same qualities using different words: integrity, humility, dependability, quiet leadership. Every statement sounded sincere because it came from personal experience rather than prepared speeches. Daniel looked at the 6 men with visible surprise before recognition slowly appeared across his face. Time had added gray hair and new careers, but their voices, posture, and quiet professionalism remained familiar. Several had not seen one another in years. They had come to the graduation for different reasons, each attending as relatives or family friends of graduating students, never expecting their paths to cross again on such an important morning. One of the men turned toward Daniel with a warm smile. "Master Sergeant, we could not stay seated after watching you handle this with the same dignity you always carried." Daniel answered softly, "It is good to see all of you again." Around them, conversations throughout the stadium nearly disappeared. Faculty members standing near the stage paused briefly as they noticed the growing gathering near the reserved seating area. Even the principal glanced toward the front rows while waiting for the graduates to begin entering the field. Officer Walker listened carefully without interrupting. Although the 6 men never identified themselves by rank or assignment, their professionalism, calm confidence, and deep respect for Daniel challenged the assumptions that had guided every decision made since the beginning of the encounter. A school administrator finally reached the group, carrying an updated seating roster together with electronic guest records on a tablet. She compared the invitation number, Daniel's identification, and the reservation database maintained by the school. After only a few moments, her expression changed completely. She quietly looked toward Walker before speaking. "Officer, the reservation is fully verified. Master Sergeant Brooks is assigned to this seat exactly as presented." Walker accepted the information without responding immediately. He looked once more toward Daniel, then toward the 6 men standing quietly beside him. None showed hostility. None demanded apologies. They simply waited for the facts to speak for themselves. High above the stadium, the American flag moved gently beneath the clear spring sky as the first graduates began appearing through the entrance tunnel. At that exact moment, the principal received a brief message from the administrator, looked toward the reserved family section, and immediately changed course, walking directly toward Daniel Brooks while the entire stadium watched in complete silence. The principal reached the reserved family section just as the graduating seniors began forming orderly lines behind the stadium entrance. Bright spring sunlight washed across the football field, reflecting from polished brass instruments and the neatly arranged rows of white folding chairs waiting on the stage. Parents instinctively stood to catch a glimpse of their children preparing to enter, yet an unusual silence remained around Master Sergeant Daniel Brooks, Officer Ryan Walker, and the 6 men who had quietly gathered beside the retired Marine. The school administrator handed the principal the verified guest records together with Daniel's invitation and identification. The principal reviewed each document carefully, then looked directly at Daniel with an expression that immediately softened. "Master Sergeant Brooks," he said respectfully, "I sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding. Your invitation and reserved seating assignment have been fully confirmed." Daniel smiled gently. "Thank you for taking the time to verify everything." There was no anger in his voice, only quiet relief that the facts had finally been allowed to speak for themselves. The principal turned toward Officer Walker before addressing the nearby families as well. "Ladies and gentlemen, there has been a verification issue that has now been completely resolved. We appreciate everyone's patience." His calm explanation allowed the atmosphere across the reserved section to relax almost immediately. Conversations slowly resumed, parents smiled again, and several people quietly applauded Daniel's remarkable composure throughout the entire situation. Walker stood silently for a moment, looking from the verified documents to the 6 men who remained beside Daniel. The first man spoke once more, his tone as calm as before. "Officer, every one of us served alongside different branches during joint operations over many years. We know this Marine because he consistently placed duty, honor, and the people around him ahead of himself. That is exactly what you have witnessed today." The remaining 5 men nodded in quiet agreement. None attempted to embarrass the officer. None raised their voices. Their presence alone communicated a level of respect earned through decades of shared service. Daniel looked toward the 6 men with genuine gratitude. "I never expected to see all of you here." One of them smiled warmly. "Neither did we. Life has a way of bringing old teammates together when it matters most." Soft laughter briefly eased the remaining tension between them. Around the stadium, the opening processional finally began. Graduates entered in long rows wearing blue caps and gowns while proud families stood to applaud. The school band played with renewed confidence as sunlight shimmered across the stage. Daniel instinctively turned toward the entrance, searching for his son among the students. Before he could sit down, the principal addressed him once more. "Master Sergeant Brooks, on behalf of our school, I would be honored if you returned to your reserved seat." Daniel accepted the invitation with quiet humility. "Thank you." As he stepped back toward his chair, something remarkable happened without anyone requesting it. The 6 former Special Operations teammates remained standing. Parents in the surrounding rows noticed their gesture and slowly rose as well. Within moments, dozens of people throughout the reserved family section had quietly stood, not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect for the dignity Daniel had displayed from the very beginning. No announcement asked them to do so. No one organized the moment. It unfolded naturally as one act of quiet appreciation inspired another. Walker watched the spontaneous display with thoughtful eyes. For the first time that morning, he fully understood that respect could never be demanded through authority alone. It had to be earned through fairness, patience, and the willingness to verify before judging. Daniel finally took his seat, carefully placing the graduation program across his lap while keeping his attention fixed on the students approaching the stage. His son appeared among the graduates only seconds later. Their eyes met briefly across the football field. The young graduate smiled with unmistakable pride after seeing his father seated exactly where he belonged. Daniel returned the smile with quiet warmth, grateful that the most important moment of the morning had been preserved. Behind him, the 6 former teammates remained standing for another respectful moment before quietly returning to their own seats, knowing that the truth had finally restored both honor and peace before the first diploma had even been awarded. The graduation ceremony continued beneath a cloudless spring sky as one graduate after another crossed the stage to receive a diploma, each name greeted by proud applause from family and friends filling the stadium. Master Sergeant Daniel Brooks sat quietly in his reserved seat with the graduation program resting across his lap, his attention fixed entirely upon the long line of students slowly moving toward the podium. The events of only a few minutes earlier already seemed distant compared with the importance of the moment unfolding before him. Around him, parents smiled through tears, grandparents lifted cameras, and children waved handmade signs decorated with school colors. The atmosphere had returned to celebration, yet many people seated nearby continued glancing toward Daniel with quiet admiration. They had witnessed not simply a misunderstanding being corrected, but a remarkable example of patience overcoming assumption. Officer Ryan Walker remained near the edge of the reserved family section performing his security responsibilities, although his thoughts were no longer focused solely upon crowd management. He replayed every decision he had made that morning, comparing his initial certainty with the verified facts that had ultimately resolved the situation. Years of experience had taught him to remain alert, but today reminded him that vigilance and fairness were strongest when working together rather than competing against one another. As another graduate accepted a diploma, the principal briefly stepped back to the podium microphone before the next group of names was announced. He smiled warmly toward the audience. "Before we continue," he said, "our school believes that today's celebration represents not only academic achievement, but also the families, mentors, veterans, teachers, and community members whose sacrifices helped these graduates reach this moment." The audience responded with appreciative applause. The principal continued, "This morning we experienced a misunderstanding that has now been completely resolved through careful verification and cooperation. We are grateful to everyone who handled the situation with professionalism, dignity, and patience." He did not mention Daniel by name, nor did he single out Officer Walker. Instead, his words honored the values that had quietly guided the resolution itself. Daniel lowered his eyes briefly, preferring not to become the focus of attention during his son's graduation. Beside him, one of the 6 former teammates smiled quietly. "Still trying to avoid the spotlight after all these years," he whispered with gentle humor. Daniel returned a small smile. "Some habits never change." Soft laughter passed between them before both men returned their attention to the stage. Walker overheard the exchange from several feet away. The absence of resentment in Daniel's voice left a deeper impression than any criticism could have achieved. The retired Marine had every opportunity to embarrass him publicly after the verification was complete. Instead, he had consistently chosen respect over pride. That decision remained with Walker as the ceremony continued. Finally, the announcer called the name Daniel had been waiting to hear all morning. His son stepped confidently across the stage wearing a blue graduation gown, accepted the diploma with both hands, and turned toward the audience with an unmistakable smile. Daniel rose to his feet together with hundreds of proud parents throughout the stadium, applauding with genuine joy. Their eyes met across the field for only a brief moment, yet nothing else seemed to exist. The graduate recognized his father's familiar Marine dress blues immediately and smiled even more broadly after seeing him seated exactly where he belonged. The 6 former teammates quietly stood as well, applauding not only the young graduate, but also the journey that had brought father and son to this remarkable day. Several nearby families joined the applause with renewed warmth, remembering everything that had unfolded before the ceremony began. When the graduates finally returned to their seats, Officer Walker slowly approached Daniel once again. His posture remained professional, but there was now unmistakable humility in his expression. He waited until the applause faded before speaking softly enough that only Daniel could hear. "Master Sergeant Brooks, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you my gratitude for showing me the difference between confidence and certainty." Daniel looked toward the stage before answering quietly. "We all continue learning as long as we are willing to listen." Walker nodded thoughtfully. The words were simple, yet they carried the quiet wisdom of someone who had spent a lifetime serving others without allowing hardship to diminish compassion. As warm afternoon sunlight settled across the football field, the ceremony moved peacefully toward its conclusion, and both men understood that the most important lesson taught that day had never appeared inside any graduation program. As the final graduates returned to their seats, the stadium slowly settled into a peaceful silence filled with quiet satisfaction. The afternoon sun hung high above the football field, casting long golden reflections across rows of blue graduation gowns and polished brass instruments resting beside the school band. Families exchanged warm embraces, children waved flowers toward older brothers and sisters, and cameras captured smiles that would be treasured for generations. Master Sergeant Daniel Brooks remained seated for a few moments longer, watching his son laugh with classmates while waiting for the official closing remarks. Nothing else mattered to him now except seeing the young man he had spent a lifetime encouraging reach this milestone with confidence and hope. Beside Daniel, the 6 former teammates quietly reflected on the unexpected reunion the morning had created. One of them looked across the field and smiled. 20 years ago, we never imagined we would meet again at a high school graduation." Another nodded. Life has strange ways of reminding us what service is really about. Daniel listened with quiet appreciation before answering softly. The mission changes. Characters should never change. The simple observation drew gentle smiles from the group before everyone returned their attention to the ceremony. A few rows away, Officer Ryan Walker remained standing near the security aisle, continuing his assigned responsibilities while carrying a noticeably different perspective than he had only an hour earlier. The stadium looked exactly the same, yet everything he noticed seemed different. He watched families celebrating together regardless of background, profession, or appearance. He watched teachers congratulating students with genuine pride. He watched volunteers helping elderly guests navigate crowded walkways with patient kindness. The graduation reminded him that every person entering the stadium carried a story that could never be understood through appearances alone. After the ceremony officially concluded, the principal invited graduates and their families onto the football field for photographs. Hundreds of people moved toward the grass in joyful celebration, while faculty members directed traffic with cheerful instructions. Daniel stood and carefully straightened the front of his marine dress blues before making his way toward the field entrance. As he approached the walkway, Officer Walker stepped forward once again. This time there was no uncertainty in his posture. He extended both hands respectfully. "Master Sergeant Brooks, thank you for allowing today to become a lesson instead of a conflict." Daniel accepted the handshake warmly. Every difficult moment gives us a choice. We can leave people smaller than we found them, or we can help each other become better. Walker nodded with sincere gratitude. "I intend to remember that for the rest of my career." Daniel smiled gently. Then today accomplished more than any misunderstanding ever could. Their conversation ended with mutual respect rather than lingering regret. Nearby, the 6 former teammates quietly watched the exchange unfold before one of them remarked, "That is exactly why people trusted him during every assignment we ever shared." None of the others disagreed. Across the football field, Daniel's son finally spotted his father approaching through the crowd. His face brightened immediately. Without hesitation, he walked over, embraced his father warmly, and stepped back just far enough to admire the familiar marine dress blues one more time. "Dad," he said proudly, "I knew you would be here." Daniel rested one hand gently on his son's shoulder. "There was never anywhere else I would rather be." The photographer waiting nearby smiled and invited them to stand together for a family picture. Before the camera shutter clicked, one of the 6 former teammates quietly asked whether they could join the photograph as well. Daniel looked at each familiar face and nodded. Moments later, 6 former Special Operations professionals, 1 retired Marine, and 1 newly graduated young man stood side by side beneath the bright spring sky. Officer Walker remained several yards away, respectfully allowing the family their moment while silently appreciating the opportunity to witness it. As the camera captured the image, sunlight reflected from Daniel's polished marine buttons, the graduation medal resting around his son's neck, and the American flag waving gently above the stadium. No one spoke during those final seconds. The photograph itself told the entire story. Honor had remained steady. Truth had quietly prevailed. Respect had replaced assumption. And a day that began with uncertainty had become a lasting reminder that genuine dignity never needs to raise its voice in order to be recognized. The stadium slowly emptied as families carried flowers, folded programs, and graduation photographs toward the parking lot beneath the warm glow of the late afternoon sun. Laughter echoed across the sidewalks while proud parents wrapped their arms around sons and daughters whose futures now stretched wide before them. Master Sergeant Daniel Brooks walked beside his son at an unhurried pace, still wearing the marine dress blues that had accompanied him through countless meaningful moments, yet none had felt more personal than this one. Every medal reflected the fading sunlight. But Daniel knew the greatest honor was walking beside the young man whose determination had transformed years of encouragement into achievement. His son glanced toward him with a smile that carried both gratitude and admiration. "Dad," he said quietly, "I heard people talking about what happened before the ceremony. I wish I had known sooner." Daniel looked toward the horizon where the evening light painted the sky with shades of gold and soft blue. "I am glad you did not," he answered gently. "Today was never supposed to become about me. It was always your day." His son nodded thoughtfully before replying. "You still taught everyone something important." Daniel smiled without saying anything more. Sometimes silence carried greater wisdom than another sentence ever could. Near the stadium entrance, Officer Ryan Walker remained helping direct families toward the parking areas until the final guests had safely departed. Before leaving his post, he noticed Daniel and his son preparing to walk toward their vehicle. Walker approached once more, not as an officer correcting a situation, but simply as one person wishing another well. "Congratulations," he said warmly to the graduate. "You should be very proud." The young man thanked him politely. Walker then turned toward Daniel. "Master Sergeant, I spoke with my supervisor after the ceremony. We reviewed everything together. We agreed that every future event will include additional verification procedures before anyone is asked to leave a reserved area. Your patience helped improve something that will benefit many families." Daniel listened carefully before extending his hand once again. Then today ended exactly as it should. Their handshake lasted only a brief moment, yet both men understood its significance. Respect had replaced misunderstanding, and accountability had become action instead of empty words. A short distance away, the 6 former teammates prepared to leave with their own families. Before walking toward the parking lot, they gathered around Daniel one final time. One of them laughed softly. "We planned to attend a graduation. Instead, we ended up witnessing another lesson in leadership." Another added, "Some lessons are never taught in classrooms." Daniel looked around at the familiar faces, grateful that chance had reunited them after so many years. "Take care of yourselves," he said warmly, "and keep showing people what real service looks like." They exchanged firm handshakes before quietly going their separate ways, disappearing into the crowd as naturally as they had first appeared. Their unexpected reunion had never been about recognition. It had simply been about standing beside a friend when character mattered most. As the parking lot gradually emptied, Daniel and his son paused beside their vehicle for one final photograph. The graduate held his diploma while Daniel rested one hand proudly on his shoulder. Behind them, the stadium stood peacefully beneath the evening sky, now almost silent except for a gentle breeze moving the American flag above the entrance. The photographer counted softly before capturing the image. In that single frame lived every sacrifice, every early morning, every lesson about perseverance, every difficult deployment, every encouraging conversation, and every quiet act of love between father and son. Years later, people might remember the photograph without knowing the misunderstanding that nearly overshadowed the day. Daniel preferred it that way. He believed lasting memories should be built upon joy rather than conflict. As they finally drove away from the school, the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the trees, leaving only the calm glow of evening across the empty football field. The reserved chair where Daniel had nearly been denied a place now sat empty, waiting for another family on another graduation day. The flags continued moving gently in the breeze. The stage stood peacefully beneath the fading sky, and the silence that remained no longer carried uncertainty. It carried quiet justice, restored respect, and the enduring truth that genuine honor never depends upon the opinions of strangers because character, once revealed, always speaks more powerfully than assumptions ever can.